The next point that I want to talk about has to do with not just what we communicate, but what we count. Now, what do I mean by what we count? I'm referring to what is your critical number? What is it that you count? In your area of responsibility, what you have control over, in your part of the business, in your part of the market, what is your critical number? Now, if you've never heard that phrase, basically think about it. If you're driving along in the vehicle of your business and your job, and you glance down at the dashboard, where does your eye go first? Do you look at the speedometer? Do you look at the odometer? Do you look at the fuel gauge? Where does your eye go first? That's your critical number. Have you ever asked a salesperson, if you're in marketing, what do you look at first? What's the first number you talk about with your team? What's the first number you look at on Monday morning when you think about what your priorities are for that week? Have you ever asked a customer, what's the number that keeps you up at night? Those are clues into what someone's critical number might be. So the first thing we have to do to understand what we count is, what do we calculate? How do we calculate that critical number? See, what I learned as I got into this business of remote monitoring and I did this advertorial and this story that I'm telling you is that I was given a very specific critical number. And the critical number that I was given made a lot of sense. They said, we want to keep track of how many patients are enrolled in our remote monitoring service. Makes sense. We offer a remote monitoring service. We want to make sure that patients are signed up for that. Sounds fantastic. And I was told that the metrics for the organization is we had always hovered just under 50%. 50% of the patients that were eligible to be signed up for this service were actually getting signed up for it. So our enrollment target was, let's get to 50%. Can we get there? And we could never get there. We couldn't move the needle on our critical number. It took me over a year and a half. It took me almost 2 years in working in this job to figure out why. It was because we had the wrong critical number. Now, how did I learn that that was the wrong number? It wasn't because of my own brilliance. I actually learned it from our salespeople and from our customers. I learned what they were paying attention to. What was moving the needle for them was not how many patients were enrolled in this service. What they were starting to pay attention to, the best of them, they were paying attention to who was actually using the service. Oh, makes a ton of sense, right? You can sign patients up for something all day long, but if they don't go home and use it, well, then it doesn't really matter if they're signed up for it or not. Why did it take me over a year and a half to figure this out? I don't know. I'm a slow learner. You would probably figure it out much faster than I did. But we talk about this, right? We talk about patient adherence to medication. We talk about patient compliance. And so we started bringing that into our vocabulary. We started bringing that into the language that we were codifying. How do we talk about the utilization of the technology, not just the enrollment in it? And that started to change everything. Once I figured out that that was the number that we needed to calculate. It came from asking sales, it came from asking customers, and then that set us off on, okay, how do we define this? What are the variables that go into the algorithm? What's the formula? Can we start to generate some reports? Where do we stand? Where do we stand as a company on this critical number? Where do our customers stand? Do they know? And what we found out is nobody knew. Nobody knew the answers to these questions. And when we developed that economic calculator tool, this is when this really sunk in for me. It's because we actually wanted to put the spreadsheet together so we could calculate economic implications of whether people adopted our solution or did not. And the key variable that affected all the numbers on that economic calculator, it was that critical number. That's how I put the pieces together, when I actually saw in the spreadsheet that it was the variable that everything else hinged on.